What is it that makes us push through something really difficult for years? Or, dedicate our entire lives to just one single goal? Well, it turns out our deepest motivations, those powerful forces that drive us, can be intentionally directed, refined, and maybe most importantly, they can be manipulated. So today, we're going to dig into the very architecture of human will. Think about it. If your purpose in life is your destination, what's the fuel that actually gets you there? I mean, especially when the road gets tough, right? What keeps the engine running?
Okay, so let's dive into this. We're going to start by drawing a really sharp line between two concepts we tend to just lump together all the time: purpose and meaning. And trust me, getting this distinction right is the key that unlocks everything else we're going to talk about.
So first up is purpose. Purpose is objective. It's the what. It's that definable long-term thing you're aiming for. If you say, my goal is to get this degree, or I want to build a successful company, those are crystal clear, objective destinations. That is your purpose. Meaning, on the other hand, is totally different. It's completely subjective. It's the emotional value, that feeling of significance you attach to the journey. It's the why. It's what makes the whole thing feel worthwhile while you're actually doing it.
And this right here is the perfect analogy. Your purpose, that's the address you punch into your GPS. But the meaning, that's the fuel in the tank. It's the belief, the emotional commitment that makes the whole journey feel worth it, especially when you hit those roadblocks that, let's be honest, you're definitely going to hit.
Okay, so now let's look at how this whole idea can be used as a really powerful tool. Because this whole mechanism of shaping meaning, it isn't inherently a bad thing. Actually, it's a core part of effective leadership, of successful therapy, and really of any genuine self-improvement.
So how do you do this constructively? Well, it really boils down to three key techniques. It's all about shifting the narrative to boost what we call intrinsic motivation, that powerful, powerful drive that comes from the inside.
First up is reframing the why. Imagine someone working a repetitive factory job. The purpose is simple: assemble parts. But what's the meaning behind it? Well, usually it's just monotony, right? A paycheck. But what if you reframe that meaning? Suddenly, you're not just putting part A into slot B. No, you're building life-saving medical equipment. Instantly, the work has this deep humanitarian significance.
The second technique, connecting to innate values, might be even more powerful. Think about exercising. The purpose, lose weight, can feel kind of shallow and it's easy to give up on. But what if you anchor it to a deep core value like family? Like, I'm doing this to be healthy enough to see my grandkids grow up. Wow, now you've created some serious motivational staying power. The purpose isn't just about a number on a scale, it's tied to your core identity.
So in all these positive examples, the goal is to align your purpose with authentic personal values, right? And that creates this incredible engine for good. But, and this is a big but, what happens when that engine gets hijacked? Because the exact same psychological need for significance that helps us grow as people is also the thing that makes us incredibly vulnerable to control on a massive scale.
See, when powerful groups or elites want to direct the long-term goals of entire populations for their own benefit, they don't always have to use brute force. Oh no, it's much more subtle and way more efficient to just manipulate the meaning that people attach to their own lives and actions.
The strategy is pure psychological leverage. It's brilliant in a way. You control the why, that deep, subjective feeling of meaning, and once you have that, you can pretty much direct the what, which is their purpose. And this allows you to achieve outcomes that serve your interests, often at the expense of the very people doing the work.
One of the most classic tactics, and you see this throughout history in all sorts of ideologies, is the ultimate bait and switch, deferring the gratification. You move the reward completely outside of this life, outside the verifiable world. Maybe it's a reward in the afterlife, or some future utopia, or even just a promised promotion that never quite comes. Suddenly, earthly life is just a test. Hardship isn't injustice anymore. It's a necessary sacrifice that's building up your credit for that big payoff later.
And the crucial point here is that this isn't just some abstract philosophical idea. Not at all. Let's look at the tangible, real-world results that happen when meaning gets hijacked and manipulated across an entire society.
This really just lays out the profound unfairness at the heart of this whole thing. Look, on one side, you have the followers who are motivated to work hard, endure suffering, and even give away their wealth, all for an intangible promise. But on the other side, the elites making the rules are accumulating very tangible, very real power and wealth, right here, right now.
And this leads directly to financial exploitation.
I mean, think about historical examples like tithing or the selling of indulgences. These things created a massive one-way transfer of wealth. Giving away a huge piece of your income is reframed. It's not a loss, it's an insurance policy against some future disaster, and that overrides your rational self-interest. And you can see echoes of this exact same pattern today, in everything from get-rich-quick schemes to corporate cultures that demand tons of unpaid overtime for the promise of a future promotion.
The second major outcome is straight-up social control. Doctrines that preach humility or that frame poverty as some kind of virtue are incredibly effective tools. They convince people that their suffering isn't a sign of a broken system, but actually a sign of their own moral superiority. And what does that do? It absolutely cripples dissent. It stops people from organizing, and it keeps the existing power structures locked firmly in place.
Okay, so this brings us to what is probably the most important part of this whole discussion. Because understanding this powerful mechanism is the key, the absolute key to making sure that the goals you're dedicating your life to are truly, authentically your own. So you really have to ask yourself, where does your commitment to things actually come from? Think about your major life goals, your career, what you do with your money, your loyalties. Are they driven by your own deep, innate values, or are they driven by a meaning that someone else handed to you?
Here's a simple way to think about it. Authentic meaning is rooted in stuff that's core to you: family, community, creativity. It energizes you from the inside out. Imposed meaning, on the other hand, almost always serves some external system: a corporation, an institution, an ideology. And it always requires external validation and promises of some future reward.
And that really leaves us with one final, crucial question to think about. We know how incredibly effective these external systems are at creating meaning for their own benefit. So take a moment and really reflect. How much of the deep commitment you feel to your major life goals comes from values that are genuinely, truly yours, and how much of it might just be a narrative, a story you've adopted from somewhere else, and mistaken for your own inner voice?
So, what is human purpose? I mean, that's the ultimate question, right? But today, we're going to skip the philosophy class, and instead, we're going to put on our evolutionary glasses. We are going to trace the entire path, from the cold, hard biological drive to just replicate our genes, all the way to the complex cultural duty to build an entire civilization. So here's how we're going to break this journey down. We're starting at the very beginning, at the microscopic level with the gene. Then we'll watch as culture starts to take over. From there, we'll dive into the absolute game changer, the revolution sparked by a surplus of food. And finally, we're going to ask the really critical question: who were the architects of this whole new system, and who did it really serve? All right, to really get this, we have to start at the absolute ground floor. I mean, we need to strip back all the layers of meaning, all the stories we've told ourselves, and get right down to the raw beginning. You know, from a strictly evolutionary point of view, purpose isn't something we really choose. It's just a fundamental, inescapable drive. Think of us, our bodies, our brains, as these incredibly sophisticated vehicles. And our only job? Our only job is to carry our genes safely into the next generation. A gene's only purpose is to make more copies of itself. It's a pretty cold mechanical starting point, I know, but it is the foundation for absolutely everything that follows. But here's the great paradox, this central twist in the human story. For our individual genes to have any shot at success, we had to stop acting purely as individuals. Suddenly, one person's fate was completely tangled up with the group's fate. My personal success now depended entirely on our success. And this gave rise to some really key behaviors. And we're not just talking about random acts of kindness here. These are powerful evolutionary strategies. Things like altruism, social hierarchies to keep the peace, and massive, intensive cooperation. All of these gave the group a huge survival advantage. All of a sudden, sacrificing a little bit for the group was the single best way to make sure your own genes made it through. It's simple, really. A cooperative group just outsurvives a selfish one, every time. And this intense need to cooperate, well, it brings us to the very bedrock of any organized society, the social contract. Now, think of this less like some fancy philosophical document and more like a binding operational manual for the group. Your purpose is no longer just about finding your own next meal. It's about maintaining the entire system that allows everyone to survive. Okay, so we've got this biological foundation set. But then something truly incredible started to happen.
We hit a tipping point where our learned collective culture didn't just nudge us in a certain direction, it grabbed the steering wheel and took over.
You gotta understand, this shift didn't happen overnight. It was a long, slow burn over hundreds of thousands of years. We can see this process of cumulative cultural evolution, our ability to learn and just build on what the last generation knew, developing really gradually. But then, with the emergence of what we call modern human behavior, that cultural engine just shifted into overdrive. There's this incredible idea called the ratchet effect. So, like a ratchet wrench that can only turn one way, forward. Cultural knowledge could be improved upon, but it rarely slipped backward and got lost. Every single generation added a new layer of complexity, a new innovation. And for the first time in the history of life on Earth, our most vital information wasn't stored in our DNA. It was stored in our minds, in our tools, and in our stories. And the supercharger for this entire process? Complex language. It unlocked what we call theory of mind, the ability to actually understand what someone else is thinking or intending. This allows for super precise instruction. You can teach someone exactly how to nap a flint arrowhead, instead of them just guessing. But the biggest leap of all was language's power to create purely abstract ideas, things that don't physically exist, like gods, or laws, or a duty to your great-grandchildren. And that is the moment a shared, manufactured purpose becomes truly possible. So that slow cultural buildup was massive, for sure. But the real, world-shattering game-changer was the Neolithic Revolution. This is the moment when a single cultural innovation, agriculture, almost completely rewrote our old biological rulebook. I mean, think about it. Before this, human purpose was defined every single day by the relentless scarcity of the hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But by domesticating a few key crops, we basically made a deal with the devil. We traded our mobility, our freedom, and our diverse diets for predictability and a massive surplus of calories. Suddenly, purpose was no longer about finding food for today. It was about maintaining the farm that guarantees food for tomorrow and the day after that. And that guaranteed surplus, well, it's the hinge upon which all of civilization swings. It allowed for much denser populations, which of course led to permanent settlements and the very first cities. And for the first time in human history, not everyone had to be a farmer. This opened the door for specialization: priests, soldiers, artisans, rulers. And that, in turn, created the need for much more formal, much more complex rules to govern everybody. And with that food surplus acting as the fuel, the first true civilizations finally emerged. The entire existence of these societies was based on successfully managing that agricultural surplus, and this cemented a brand new, highly structured, collective purpose. Okay, so this is a really crucial point. This new collective purpose, it wasn't just happening organically. It was being actively designed. It was engineered. Which, of course, brings us to the most critical question of all. Who were the architects, and who benefited the most from this new arrangement? Well, a new and deeply unequal social contract started to take shape almost immediately. At the very top, you had the rulers. They controlled the two most important tangible things, the extra food and the army. But to make that power stick, you needed the priests. They controlled the story, the divine narrative that explained why the rulers were in charge in the first place. And then to actually run the whole thing, you needed the scribes, the administrators who controlled information itself through the incredibly rare skill of being able to read and write. So you can basically picture this new structure as a pyramid. At the very top, you have a tiny elite class, maybe 20% of the population if you're being generous. And their entire existence was supported by the hard labor of the vast majority, the other 80% at the bottom. And the purpose of the masses? Well, it became pretty simple. Produce the resources that fueled the entire system. It's like each of these elite groups had its own special lever of control, and they all worked together. Rulers had the hard power, the military and the resources. The priests held the soft power of ideology. They provided the why. And the scribes? They managed the administrative power of information, the how. So for the overwhelming majority of people, their new culturally engineered purpose became fixed. It was no longer this dynamic dance with nature. It was a static role inside a very rigid hierarchy. Your job was to produce the food, build the monuments, and obey the rules that were set by the architects of the system. And this brings us right to the core trade-off. Let's be clear. This whole transition was a massive, runaway success for the human species. Our population exploded, our technology advanced, but that success was built on a foundation of deep systemic inequality. It wasn't a bug in the system, it was a feature, right from the very start.
So this whole incredible journey from the gene all the way to civilization, it brings us to a really important, really pointed question for our world today. We've seen how the invention of complex religion, that ideological glue, was absolutely critical in creating a shared sense of purpose for thousands of years.
So, if that original glue that held civilization's purpose together for millennia is now weakening in our modern, more secular world, what's taking its place? What new mechanisms, what new narratives, and maybe what new controllers are rising up to define our collective purpose now? That is the structural legacy that every single one of us is living through today.
You know, we often think that finding our purpose is this big intellectual quest, kind of like writing a mission statement for our lives. But today, we're going to peel back the curtain and look at the actual biology of meaning, how your brain is literally wired to create a sense of purpose. So let me ask you this. Have you ever worked for years to hit some huge goal? You finally get there, you cross the finish line, and you just feel kind of empty. But then, on the flip side, some small random moment, like a conversation with a friend, can feel packed with meaning. We're going to get into the why behind that exact feeling.
And this really gets to the heart of a huge shift in our understanding. The old way of thinking was that meaning is a top-down thing, right? A story you decide on and then tell yourself. But the new science is showing us it's much more primal than that. Meaning isn't just something you think. It's a profound, physical, felt experience. It's a chemical and emotional signal that your body generates from the bottom up. Which brings us to our first big point. Meaning isn't just in your head. And to really get this, we have to totally rethink what emotions even are in the first place.
For so long, we've kind of dismissed emotions as this messy, irrational baggage we have to deal with. But that's not it at all. They're actually a highly advanced, incredibly sophisticated system. They aren't just random noise. They are the brain's #1 tool for assigning value to every single thing that happens to you.
The best way to think about it is like this. Emotions are your brain's internal compass. Before your conscious, logical mind even has a chance to boot up, this compass is instantly tagging people, events, and goals with a value. It's your built-in, split-second relevance detector.
And you can see this playing out all the time. An event by itself is just neutral data, but an emotion makes it matter. Joy isn't just a pleasant feeling. It's an urgent bulletin from your brain screaming, "Hey, pay attention, this is good for you, go get more of it." And fear is a high-priority alarm. "Danger, this is critical for your survival, avoid this threat right now." Emotions make information urgent. They make it actionable.
Okay, so if emotions are tagging everything with value at lightning speed, how in the world does the brain actually do that? Well, that's where we get into the brain's remarkably simple value system.
It's incredibly efficient, actually. It just uses two main dimensions. The first one is called valence. This is the most basic question your brain can ask. Is this good or is this bad? Positive or negative? That's the first filter for everything.
And the second dimension is arousal. This one is all about intensity. Is this experience high energy, all amped up, or is it quiet and calm? So you've got your good-bad axis and your intense-calm axis. And this is where the magic happens. When you put valence and arousal together, you get this amazing instant instruction manual for life. A calm, positive feeling like contentment, that's your brain saying, maintain this. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. An intense positive feeling like excitement, that's a clear order. Pursue this. On the flip side, an intense negative feeling like fear is a command to act now, while a calm negative feeling like boredom is a little nudge to change state. This simple 2x2 grid is basically running our lives.
So the really crucial point here is that these feelings aren't passive. They are specifically designed to make us do things, which leads us right to the two powerful engines of action that drive pretty much everything we do.
And get this, the connection is baked right into our language. The words emotion and motivation, they share the exact same Latin root, movere, which just means to move. It's incredible, right? Our emotions are, quite literally, what moves us. They're the biological push and pull that carves out the path of our lives.
And these action generators work through two main systems. First, you've got the pursuit engine. This one runs on all those positive emotions like joy and curiosity. It's what pushes you to chase rewards, to build things, to explore. And then you have the correction engine. This one runs on negative emotions, and its job is to get you to fix problems and get away from threats.
So let's look at that pursuit engine. It works through something called the broaden and build giri.
It's this fantastic idea that when you feel positive emotions, it literally broadens your perspective. It makes you more open, more creative. And that openness pushes you to explore, which in turn builds real, lasting resources in your life. Things like new skills, stronger friendships, better health. So feeling good isn't just the prize at the end, it's an investment strategy for a better future.
But what about that other engine, the correction engine? This is where we see its paradoxical power. I mean, this quote says it all, doesn't it? The intense pain you feel from seeing real suffering can become a kind of motivational fuel that simple pleasure just can't match. It can be the spark that drives an entire lifetime of service.
And this gets at a powerful phenomenon called post-traumatic growth. This isn't just about being resilient or bouncing back to where you were before. It's about how the deep emotional need to make sense of suffering can become the very engine for building a completely new life, one with a much deeper sense of purpose and a clearer view of what really matters.
So we've seen that our feelings drive us to act, but how does the brain actually create these powerful signals? Well, to understand that, we have to get down to the next level and decode our inner chemistry.
It all comes down to two kinds of chemical messengers. You've got neurotransmitters, which are the super-fast messengers sending signals inside the brain. And then you have hormones, which are slower. They travel through your bloodstream and create these broader, more lasting emotional states.
Okay, let's start with the one everybody's heard of, dopamine. But here's the thing that most people get wrong. Dopamine isn't really the pleasure chemical. It's the chemical of anticipation. It's about the craving, the motivation, the drive to get the reward. It's the go-get-it molecule that fuels the entire chase.
Now, if dopamine is the gas pedal, you can think of serotonin as the brain's mood stabilizer. It's shock absorber. It provides that bedrock sense of calm, well-being, and resilience. And you absolutely need it to stick with the long, hard, gritty pursuits that usually lead to the most profound kinds of meaning. And then there's oxytocin, the so-called bonding hormone. This one is a total game changer because it shifts our brain's focus away from our own individual rewards and toward the well-being of the group. It's what fosters trust, intimacy, and empathy. It's the chemical foundation for all the meaning we find in our relationships and our communities.
And you can really see how these chemicals work together as a cocktail. No single chemical tells the whole story. Take falling in love, that initial infatuation phase. That's a high dopamine, high arousal state of excitement and focus. But for that to last, for it to become a deep, meaningful bond, the chemistry has to change. Oxytocin and serotonin need to take the lead, creating a foundation of trust, calm, and security. The recipe has to evolve for the meaning to endure.
So, let's bring this all home. Your feelings, all those chemical signals of good, bad, and intense calm, they're the raw data of your life. But the meaning of your life? That's the coherent story, the narrative that you build from that data to make sense of it all.
Which really leaves us with one final big question to think about. When you look at the story of your own life, are you mostly chasing those fleeting dopamine highs? Or are you doing the harder, more significant work of turning emotional struggle into lasting, durable meaning? Because that choice might just be the most important chemical management decision you ever make.
You know that feeling, right? That little knot in your stomach before a big presentation, or that sting when you feel left out of a conversation. Turns out, that's not just some modern quirk. It's actually a really deep evolutionary puzzle. And today, we're going to piece it all together.
So why does what other people think have such a powerful grip on us? Well, the answer, turns out, is literally hardwired into our biology. But, and this is the important part, it's being twisted and amplified by the modern world in ways our ancestors could never, ever have imagined.
To really get our heads around our modern anxiety, we have to go way, way back. See, throughout human history, there have been two main ways to get ahead in the group. The first one is dominance. Think of the classic playground bully. It's status that's taken through force and fear. But humans, we pioneered a second path, prestige. Now this is different. This is status that's given to you, freely, because you have valuable skills the group really needs. It's all about earning respect, not demanding it. And look, this isn't just some abstract social theory. This drive for status is literally baked into our biology. Our brains didn't just evolve to find food and run from predators. They also evolved to be these incredibly sensitive social calculators, constantly, and I mean constantly, tracking where we fit in.
Just think about the last time you got a promotion, or maybe someone just gave you some genuine, heartfelt praise for your work. That warm feeling you get, that's not just in your head, it's a real chemical reaction. Evolution basically made sure that climbing the social ladder felt good.
And here's what's happening on a chemical level. When we gain status, our brain's reward circuits just light up. We get a little hit of dopamine. Yep, the exact same neurotransmitter that's involved in pleasure and motivation. Our biology is literally designed to reward us for seeking social approval. It wants us to do it.
But there's a really dark side to this ancient programming, because if gaining status feels great, losing it, or even just the fear of losing it, feels absolutely terrible. Our brains treat social rejection with an intensity that, on the surface seems totally over the top.
And here's why. For our ancestors, getting kicked out of the group was a death sentence, period. So our brains evolved to treat social threats, things like public shame or being rejected, with the exact same life or death urgency as facing a predator. Your body's core stress response kicks into high gear, flooding you with stress hormones. And that's why bombing a presentation can feel, on a deep biological level, just as terrifying as facing down a lion. Okay, but back in that ancient world, how did you actually prove your value? How did you signal to everyone that you were worthy of prestige? The answer lies in this really cool concept from evolutionary biology, costly signaling theory. The idea is actually pretty simple. For a signal to be honest and believable, it has to be hard to fake.
Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine a hunter back in the Paleolithic. Bringing back a huge animal from a hunt was an incredibly costly signal. It took time, it took immense skill, and it was super risky. You couldn't just say you did it. The sheer cost of the hunt guaranteed the honesty of the signal, which was basically, hey everyone, I'm skilled, I'm strong, and I can provide for this group. This was the original, undeniable status update.
Now, for thousands and thousands of years, this system, prestige based on skills you could actually see, worked pretty well. But then, a massive shift happened that completely rewrote the rules of the status game. We invented agriculture, and civilization was born.
You see, once we settled down and started farming, we created something brand new. Surplus. Stored food, land, wealth. This allowed people to specialize, and for the first time in human history, it created deep social layers. Hierarchy became way more rigid. And suddenly, status wasn't just about what you could do, it was about what you had.
This new world gave rise to a totally new kind of costly signal, one called conspicuous consumption. It's basically the public display of wealth, not for any practical reason, but purely to signal your rank. Think of it like this. It's a way of hacking our ancient wiring. Instead of signaling skill by hunting a mammoth, you signal power by being able to waste resources on something totally useless. The wastefulness is the point. It proves you have so much you can just afford to throw it away.
And we see this everywhere in history, right? Building a massive tomb for a dead pharaoh is just a spectacular way of showing how many resources you can command. The Romans had a purple dye that was so expensive, only the absolute elite could wear it. Some societies even passed laws, they called them sumptuary laws, that legally restricted who could wear certain fabrics or colors based on their class. All of a sudden, status signals became these abstract symbols you had to learn, and they were completely disconnected from any actual practical skill. Okay, so that brings us to today, where these ancient biological drives and these newer cultural rules have combined to create a perfect storm of anxiety. We are living in a pressure cooker that is relentlessly, constantly activating our old status-seeking machinery. And there are 4 key factors that are really turning up the heat. We're faced with massive, super visible inequality. Unlike our ancestors, there's nowhere to go to escape the social hierarchy. We're told constantly that any failure is our own personal fault, and, maybe most importantly, we're comparing ourselves on a scale that is completely alien to human history.
I mean, think about it. For almost all of our evolution, our status was determined within a pretty small local group. We compared ourselves to maybe 150 people, max, the people we literally saw every single day. Our social world was knowable, it was contained.
Now compare that to today. Our brains, which are wired for that small local comparison, are now plugged into a global network of billions of people. We're not just comparing ourselves to our neighbors anymore. We're comparing our average Tuesday to the perfectly curated highlight reels of the most successful, most wealthy, and most attractive people on the entire planet. It's a game our psychology was just never designed to play.
And it's not like we're just playing one game, we're forced to play several, all at the same time. Different elite groups in society set the rules. Politicians and clergy, they tell us what it means to be a good person. Business leaders define what success looks like, our income, our job titles.
And then cultural elites judge our taste in everything from art to the clothes we wear. So we're getting scored on all of these different fronts, all the time.
So, when you put it all together, our ancient biology crashing head-on into this modern, hyper-competitive, globally connected world, the outcome is almost inevitable. Our anxiety isn't an accident. It almost seems to be a feature of the system.
And the fallout from this is severe. It's not just a feeling, right? It's chronic anxiety that physically wears our bodies down. It makes people feel powerless, like the game is rigged against them. And for some, the psychological pain just becomes so great that the only escape feels like self-medication.
So if you feel this pressure, if you feel this anxiety about where you stand socially, it is not a sign that you're weak or that you're broken. It's a perfectly predictable, totally logical response. Your ancient brain is just screaming a survival alarm that the modern world is triggering 24/7.
And all of this leaves us with a really profound and challenging question. Knowing what we now know about our evolved psychology, is it even possible to design a society that doesn't constantly weaponize our need to belong? Could we create communities, create systems that deactivate these ancient threat alarms? Or is this deep, gnawing status anxiety simply the price we have to pay for living in a complex, large-scale civilization?
Have you ever just stopped and really thought about what makes you, you? It feels so solid, right? So real. But what's incredible is that deep inside your brain, there's this constant, complex construction project going on, building the very architecture of your identity, piece by piece.
I mean, really think about it. Who's actually in control? It feels like a simple question, but the answer goes right to the very heart of who we are. Are you the one pulling the strings, making all the calls? Or is there something else happening just behind the curtain? So let's start with this powerful idea. Just imagine your life is a car. It feels like you're the one in the driver's seat, yeah? Well, that feeling, that's the absolute foundation of your entire sense of self. You know, there's a name for this. Psychologists call it the sense of agency. And it's not just some abstract thought. It's a fundamental gut feeling that your brain is building for you every single moment of every single day. This sense of agency is that deep intuitive feeling that when you reach for your coffee, it was you who decided to do it. When you speak, those are your words coming out of your mouth. You're the author, the cause, the driver. That feeling is what draws the line between you and, well, everything else. Okay, so how on earth does the brain pull this off? It's pretty amazing, actually. It uses this fascinating dual system. It has to constantly look inward to confirm that, yep, you're in control, while at the same time, it's looking outward to see who else is out there. So you've got these two systems running in parallel. The first one is that sense of agency we've been talking about. It's your internal fact checker that says, I did that. The second system is all about agent detection. It's like an external scanner, constantly on the lookout for other drivers in your world. And this table here breaks down that duality perfectly. You see, the sense of agency is an internal thing. It's all about confirming, I did that. Agent detection is the complete opposite. It's an external scanner, totally focused on telling the difference between self and other. One system literally builds you from the inside out, while the other defines you by what you're not. So let's dig into that internal system. How does it actually know that I did that? Well, it's not magic, not at all. It's a brilliant predictive process that's happening in your brain at lightning speed. It's called the comparator model. Here's how it works. When you decide to move, your brain sends out a command to your muscles. But, and this is the genius part, it also sends a copy of that command to an internal simulator. This simulator predicts exactly what that action should feel and look like. Then, your brain compares that prediction to what actually happens in the real world. If they match, boom, you get that solid feeling of agency. But if they don't match, if there's a prediction error, your brain concludes, wait a minute, I didn't do that. Now, this whole process reveals that agency actually has two different levels. First, there's the automatic feeling of agency. That's the gut sense of control coming from the comparator model. But then layered on top of that, you have the judgment of agency. And that's the conscious story you tell yourself about what happened. So let's say you slip on some ice. Your gut feeling instantly tells you, whoa, I lost control. But your conscious judgment might come in later and spin a new story, like, I chose to fall that way to avoid getting hurt worse. It's incredible. Our beliefs can literally rewrite our own experience of control. All right, so we've looked at the internal system that builds your sense of self. Now let's flip the switch and look outward. Because, to really know who you are, your brain first has to figure out who you aren't. And for that, it's got a very special and very, very sensitive tool. It's called the Hypersensitive Agency Detection Device, or HADD for short. And the logic behind it is pure evolutionary survival. Just think about it. If you're an early human and there's a rustle in the bushes, missing a predator that's hiding there, a false negative, means you're dinner. It's fatal. But mistaking the wind for a predator, a false positive, is totally harmless. You just get a little spooked. So over millions of years, our brains evolved to be a bit trigger-happy, biased towards seeing agency absolutely everywhere. This is the reason you might see a face in the clouds or feel like a coincidence was meant to be. It's just your ancient survival software running in the background. So these two systems, looking in and looking out, they're the fundamental building blocks of you. And it starts from day one. At birth, infants learn about their own agency just by seeing that the world responds to them when they cry or move. Then, around 18 months, you get that famous mirror test, where a toddler finally recognizes themselves. That's the self versus other distinction clicking firmly into place. And by about age 7, these systems lay the groundwork for a whole new layer of self, one that's focused on goals and the future. This whole developmental timeline brings us to a really powerful model of our adult personality. See, your identity isn't just one single thing. It's more like a structure with 3 distinct layers, each one built on top of the last. Psychologist Dan McAdams describes these as 3 layers of you. At the base, you are the social actor. This is you in the here and now, defined by your traits and your roles. Then, building on top of that, you become the motivated agent, driven by your future goals and your deepest values. And finally, you become the autobiographical author, the storyteller who weaves your past, present, and future into a single, coherent life story that makes sense to you. And right here is where our sense of agency becomes absolutely crucial. It is the engine that drives that second layer, the motivated agent. Think about it. To have goals, to make plans for the future, you have to have a fundamental belief that you're the one in the driver's seat, that you actually have the power to make things happen. This internal architecture is incredibly powerful. But you know what? It's also surprisingly fragile. And we can see just how critical it is by taking a look at what happens when it all starts to break down. Just listen to this quote describing a condition called depersonalization. This is what it feels like when that low-level automatic feeling of agency just vanishes. You're still acting, you're still moving through the world, but you feel like a spectator, like you're just watching a movie of your own life. The wire between you and your actions has been cut. And we see these kinds of disturbances across several conditions. In schizophrenia, a faulty comparator model can make a person's own thoughts feel like they're coming from an external voice. The prediction doesn't match the reality, so the brain concludes, I didn't think that, someone else did. In other conditions, an unstable sense of agency can make the entire self-image feel like it's fracturing. Or sometimes, the challenge isn't with the basic feeling of control, but with weaving that feeling into a coherent high-level story of the self. It just goes to show how fundamental this internal architecture is to our mental well-being. Which brings us back around to one last fascinating question. We've seen that the self isn't some solid thing we're born with, but a dynamic, ongoing process, an architecture being built by your brain. So if your self is the building, then who or what is the architect?
Have you ever just stopped and wondered what's really going on inside your own head? I mean, we throw around words like ego and self all the time, almost like they're the same thing. But in psychology, they're 2 totally different crucial parts of our inner world. And honestly, getting the difference is the key to figuring out who we are and why on earth we do the things we do.
We hear it constantly, right? Someone acts a little arrogant, maybe they're super confident, and we immediately say, wow, they have a big ego. But what if I told you that entire phrase, that common idea, completely misses the point of what the ego actually is? Because in psychology, the ego has nothing to do with arrogance. It's actually one of the most critical systems running your entire mind.
And this slide right here, this is the heart of the confusion. In pop culture, ego is just shorthand for self-importance. But in the world of psychology, the ego is a manager, a problem solver. It's not the part of you that feels arrogant. It's the part that's constantly mediating, managing your impulses, and figuring out how to get things done in the real world.
So to really get this, we're going to lean on a super powerful metaphor for the rest of this explainer. Just remember this. The ego is the manager of your mind. And the self-concept, well, that's the blueprint that the manager's working from.
Okay, so here's the most important thing to get about the ego. It's a process, not a thing. It's a verb. Think of it as your mind's manager. It has to listen to the part of you that wants what it wants right now, the part that's your strict moral conscience, and the hard facts of reality. And then it has to make a call. Its goal is super practical. Get what you want, but without landing you in a bunch of trouble.
The self-concept, on the other hand, isn't a process, it's the content. It's that blueprint we talked about. It's the whole file cabinet of information you have labeled me. It's your personal answer to that giant question, who am I? This is the identity, the collection of beliefs and feelings that your inner manager, the ego, is constantly working with and trying to protect.
Let's just put these side by side to make it crystal clear. The ego's job is active. It's all about control, regulation, and defense. The self-concept is more passive. It's the structure that holds all your beliefs about yourself. So while the ego is in the trenches managing conflicts, the self-concept is the library of information it's protecting. One is the dynamic system, the other is the blueprint it's built to serve.
So what's actually in this blueprint? Well, it pretty much breaks down into 3 core parts. You've got your self-image, which is how you see yourself. I'm a hard worker, I'm a loyal friend. Then there's self-esteem, which is how much you value yourself, how you feel about those descriptions. And finally, the ideal self, which is that person you're always hoping to become. The ego's job, really, is to manage the space between these 3.
All right, so if you're the manager of a priceless, one-of-a-kind blueprint, what's your number 1 job? You got it. Protect it. And let me tell you, the ego has a whole bag of tricks for doing exactly that, especially when that blueprint feels threatened.
This is where it gets really, really interesting. So let's say you're a blueprint. Your self-image says you're an honest person, but then you tell a lie. That creates this internal clash, this psychological static we call anxiety or cognitive dissonance. The ego's prime directive is to shut down that anxiety and make your self-concept feel consistent again by any means necessary.
Let's look at one of the ego's favorite tools, rationalization. It's a classic. Here's how it plays out. Step 1, you snap at your friend, which totally clashes with your self-image as a kind person. Step 2, you feel that awful pang of guilt and tension. Step 3, your ego swoops in and says, well, they were really pushing my buttons and I've had a terrible day. See? It sounds logical. Step 4, the tension vanishes. Your blueprint is safe again. You're a kind person who is justifiably provoked.
And rationalization is just one tool in this massive kit. The ego has a whole spectrum of defenses. You've got immature ones like denial, literally just pretending something didn't happen. And you've got really mature ones like sublimation, where you take an unacceptable impulse like aggression and channel it into something productive, like becoming a competitive athlete. The big takeaway here is that your ego is always active, constantly shaping and defending your sense of self.
But what happens when the manager gets completely overworked? When the system is pushed to its absolute limit and it starts to crack?
This brings us to a really important modern idea called ego depletion. The best way to think about it is this. Your willpower, that mental energy your ego uses for self-control and making hard decisions, it's a limited resource. It's like a muscle, and when you overuse it, it gets exhausted.
You can practically feel this during a long day, right? You start off with a full tank of willpower in the morning, but every single time you resist checking your phone, force yourself to finish a boring task, or deal with a frustrating person, you burn a little bit of that fuel. By the end of the day, your resources are shot. This is exactly why it's so much easier to skip the gym or eat a pint of ice cream at 9 p.m. than it is at 9 a.m. Your inner manager is just plain tired.
And when this system is chronically failing, the consequences can be really serious. You see it in things like poor self-regulation, think addiction or chronic procrastination. You see it when a broken blueprint leads to anxiety and depression. People start relying heavily on those immature defense mechanisms we talked about, and their whole sense of who they are can feel either totally fragmented or dangerously rigid.
But here's the good news. This system isn't static. It's not set in stone. The relationship between the manager and the blueprint is supposed to grow, evolve, and mature over our entire lives.
The psychologist Jane Lovinger mapped out this journey perfectly. When we're young, our ego is pretty basic, so our self-concept is simple too. It's all about what gets me a reward and what gets me in trouble. Later on as teens, we hit the conformist stage, where our identity is all about fitting in with our group. But with maturity, the ego can reach the autonomous stage, where it can finally handle nuance and inner conflict. And that allows for a much more complex, integrated self-concept, one that can actually accept its own contradictions.
And this quote just nails it. Let me translate.
The state of your self-concept, your personal blueprint, is basically the performance review for your ego. If your sense of self is healthy, flexible, and makes sense to you, it's a pretty sure sign that you have a mature, effective inner manager running the show.
But the story doesn't just end with a mature ego. The final stage of our psychological growth, according to some of the great thinkers, actually presents us with this really fascinating paradox.
Okay, part one of the paradox. You absolutely have to do the work. You have to build that strong, resilient, mature ego. You need a capable inner manager who can handle reality, regulate your emotions, and keep a stable sense of who you are. This is the bedrock of a healthy life. No skipping this step.
But here's the twist. Only after you've built that strong ego can you begin to let it go. True self-transcendence, connecting to something much bigger than yourself, means you have to move beyond the very self-focused boundaries the ego worked so hard to create. The paradox is that you have to build a strong self just so you can learn how to forget the self.
Which of course brings it all back to you. It's an invitation to look inward and ask yourself, how is my own internal system running? How strong is my inner manager? And maybe, more importantly, what's the quality of the blueprint it's working so hard to protect day in and day out?
Today we're diving into a really deep psychological puzzle, one that almost sounds like a riddle. It's all about how you can truly move beyond yourself. And trust me, the answer is not what you think it is.
So here's the big question, right? It's something people have been asking for, well, forever. How do you get to that state of self-transcendence? You know, quieting that nonstop, self-obsessed chatter in your head. Well, it turns out the path there is completely counterintuitive.
Get this, you do it by first building the strongest, most resilient, most put-together self you possibly can. Yeah, it's a total paradox. To truly let go, you first have to learn how to hold on tighter, and frankly, better than you ever have before. So let's break down how this incredible process actually works.
Okay, to really get our heads around this paradox, we need to kind of become architects of our own minds. And that means we have to understand the basic building blocks that make up our sense of who we are. It all starts with separating two core systems that, honestly, most of us just lump together.
So think about your identity as having two main parts. First, you've got the machinery that's running the whole show, and then you've got the story that all that machinery is designed to protect. You have the doer, and you have the story. Let's pull them apart and see what's what.
In psychology, we call these the ego and the self-concept. The ego is the operational mechanism. It's the part that's actually doing things. The self-concept, on the other hand, is the content. It's the library of beliefs you have about who you are. These are not the same thing, and knowing the difference is absolutely crucial for everything that follows.
Let's start with the ego. The best way to think about it, it's the CEO of your mind. Seriously, it's your executive function. It's the part that's constantly managing reality, making tough decisions, and trying its best to keep your impulses from running wild. It is actively trying to steer the ship 24/7.
Okay, so if the ego is the CEO, then the self-concept is the company's official mission statement. It's the big story that the CEO is working day and night to uphold. It's the grand sum of everything you believe to be true about yourself. I'm a good person. I'm smart. I'm not the kind of person who gives up. The ego's main job is to make choices that don't contradict that story.
But here's the thing. This inner CEO isn't static. It's supposed to grow and develop over your lifetime. Just like in a video game, it has to level up, gaining new skills and new ways of thinking to handle life's increasingly complex challenges.
And this growth, it tends to happen in stages. Early on, the ego is self-protective, super rigid, seeing the world in black and white, rules and punishments. Then it often becomes conformist, where our identity is all about fitting in with our group. After that, it can move to conscientious, becoming more driven by internal goals and values. But the really big transformation is what happens next.
This is the game changer, the autonomous stage. This is where the ego develops a kind of superpower. It gets the ability to handle inner conflict and ambiguity. It can hold two completely opposite ideas in its head at the same time without totally freaking out or having to deny reality. Suddenly, the world doesn't have to be so simple anymore, and that's a huge deal.
You can see the whole journey kind of mapped out here. You can see how the ego's main job shifts over time. It starts with just basic self-preservation, using primitive defenses to get by.
But eventually, it can evolve all the way to self-actualization, where its primary focus is on creating internal harmony. It's like getting promoted from a bouncer to a wise, visionary leader.
So once this inner CEO has reached that high level of maturity, it unlocks the first major destination on our journey. We're talking about a state of peak psychological health, something we call self-actualization.
Now, the key to self-actualization is a really cool concept called congruence. It's a state of beautiful, elegant alignment. It's that sweet spot where the person you want to be, your ideal self, lines up perfectly with the person you believe you are, which also lines up with what you're actually doing and experiencing day to day. There are no gaps.
And you can really see what that looks like here. On one side, you've got congruence. Everything's in sync, everything's flowing. It creates a sense of harmony. But on the other side, you've got incongruence, and that gap between who you want to be and who you feel you are. That's where anxiety comes from. It forces the ego to work overtime, defending a story that just doesn't quite match reality.
So here's the massive payoff. A self-actualized person has an ego that is strong enough and flexible enough to maintain this state of congruence. It doesn't have to waste tons of mental energy on defenses like denial or making excuses. And all that energy that's freed up, it can now be channeled into things like creativity, genuine connection, and real, meaningful growth.
And this, right here, brings us all the way back to our paradox. Once you have a fully actualized self, you are finally, for the very first time, in a position to safely move beyond it. This is the final frontier of our psychological journey.
Now, this is where it gets a little dangerous. See, trying to dissolve the self when you have a weak, fragile ego, that's like trying to dismantle a nuclear reactor without a containment building. It's a recipe for disaster. A strong, integrated ego is that containment building. It can witness the process of letting go without getting shattered by it.
So how does this actually work on a mechanical level? Well, inside all of us, we have two key operating systems. There's the explicit system. That's our analytical, planning, conscious mind, which we can basically call the ego. And then there's the implicit system, our deeper, intuitive, holistic self. And for most of us, most of the time, there's a big wall between them.
Ego transcendence, then, is not about destroying the ego. It's about achieving such a high level of mental mastery that you can willfully and safely lower that wall between the two systems. It's the incredible ability to consciously switch from your analytical mind to your holistic, intuitive mind. And then, this is the important part, integrate the wisdom from both.
And with that final piece in place, we can finally solve the paradox we started this whole thing with. All the clues are on the table now.
So here it is, the big resolution in one sentence. A weak ego clings to its boundaries because it's afraid of falling apart. But a strong, self-actualized ego has the confidence, the stability, and the control to let those boundaries dissolve, not as an act of helpless surrender, but as an act of supreme mastery. You need the strength first to truly let go.
All right, let's just do a quick recap of that whole journey. First, we learned your ego is the doer and your self-concept is the story it protects. Second, that doer has to level up through stages, learning to handle more and more complexity. Third, all that strength leads to self-actualization, which is that awesome state of internal alignment or congruence. And finally, and most importantly, self-transcendence isn't about losing control. It is the ultimate expression of control. So I'll just leave you with this final thought to chew on. If the CEO of your mind could really achieve this incredible level of mastery, if it could access those deeper, more intuitive parts of itself whenever it wanted, what amazing new potentials for growth, for creativity, and for connection might it unlock for you? So, today we're going to map out a path from that nagging feeling that something's just a little bit off to a state of real, profound purpose. And we'll be using some incredibly powerful ideas from humanistic psychology to guide us. All right, let's dive in. You know that feeling, right? That sense of being stuck? Like there's this inner tug-of-war where your actions don't quite line up with your dreams. Well, it turns out that gap is a totally normal, universal human experience. And today, we're not just going to understand it, we're going to learn how to finally bridge it.
So here's our roadmap for today. Think of it like a climb, a step-by-step journey toward a more whole and authentic you. We'll kick things off by figuring out the problem. Then we'll build a solid foundation, reach for our potential, and then we'll look even further.
Okay, first up, the gap within. So what is this gap, really? Let's get right to the heart of what's causing that inner conflict.
Well, there's actually a name for this feeling. It's called incongruence. The psychologist Carl Rogers coined the term, and it's basically the official word for that mismatch, that tension you feel when who you genuinely are doesn't line up with who you think you should be.
So here are the two players in this inner battle. On one side, you've got your real self. That's the authentic you, your genuine thoughts, feelings, the whole deal. And on the other side, you have the ideal self. This is who you feel you're supposed to be, and it's often built out of expectations from family, society, you name it. Our entire journey today is about bringing these two into harmony.
All right, part 2. This is where we start building our foundation. We're talking about congruence, that amazing state of internal harmony that is absolutely essential for everything that's going to come next.
Now, the biggest obstacle in our way is something called conditional self-regard. This is that little voice in your head that whispers, "I'm only worthy if I'm successful," or "I'm only lovable if I never mess up." Rogers called these conditions of worth, and they are basically the jet fuel for our inner critic.
So how do we fight back? Well, it really comes down to 3 powerful strategies. First, we have to get really self-aware so we can even spot those conditions when they pop up. Then, we practice unconditional self-acceptance. And finally, we take authentic action that starts to merge our ideal self with our real self.
The absolute cornerstone of this whole process is self-compassion. Now, this isn't about letting yourself off the hook or having a pity party. It's about fundamentally shifting your inner dialogue from a harsh judge to a supportive coach, just like you would for a friend you really care about.
And here's a simple, super powerful way to put this into practice from Dr. Kristen Neff. Next time you're struggling, just try this. First, acknowledge the feeling. Be mindful and say, "Wow, this hurts." Second, connect to our shared humanity. Remind yourself, struggling is a part of life. Everyone feels this way sometimes. And third, offer yourself some genuine kindness. Maybe even put a hand on your heart and say, "May I be kind to myself in this moment."
Oof. We all know this voice, don't we? This is the inner critic in action. It takes one single event and turns it into this massive sweeping judgment about our entire worth. It's so harsh, so final, and it's what keeps us trapped in that state of incongruence.
But we can reframe it. Look at the incredible difference here. The inner critic just judges you, but the inner coach analyzes. It acknowledges the truth. It had rough moments, but it immediately focuses on growth and separates that one event from who you are as a person. This single shift is an absolute game changer. Okay, so once we've laid that foundation of congruence and we've started practicing self-compassion, we can finally move to the next stage of our climb, self-actualization. Self-actualization is that innate drive we all have to become the most we can possibly be. See, once we stop wasting all our energy on that internal battle, on self-criticism, all of that energy is freed up to pursue our genuine potential and live a truly authentic life.
And what does that actually look like? Well, it looks like this. It's about dropping the masks and just being genuine. It means being open to all of life, the good, the bad, the beautiful, the messy, without trying to distort it. And it's about channeling all that rediscovered energy into creativity and living a life that feels packed with purpose.
This here is a truly critical shift in mindset. A mistake or a so-called failure is no longer evidence that you're worthless. Instead, it just becomes data. It's a data point you can use to learn from, to adjust, and to grow. It's all just part of your unique story. Now for the final ascent. Because beyond self-actualization, the psychologist Abraham Maslow identified an even higher level of human development. He called it self-transcendence.
This is the point where we move beyond just our own personal fulfillment. It's an expansion of our identity, where we start to feel a deep, meaningful connection to something bigger than ourselves. Whether that's serving humanity, feeling at one with nature, or dedicating our lives to a cause we believe in. This captures the core idea perfectly. Self-actualization is all about fulfilling the I, but self-transcendence is about dissolving that I into a larger, interconnected us. See, once your personal needs are met and you feel whole, you naturally start turning your energy outward to contribute to the greater good.
And this isn't just some abstract idea. There are very concrete ways to nurture it. You can shift from self-interest to service through altruism.
You can actively seek out experiences of awe and get into flow states. You can deepen your connections through practices like mindfulness and gratitude. And you can prioritize values like benevolence that benefit everyone, not just you.
Okay, so let's bring it all home and take one last look at the path we've just mapped out.
This table lays out the whole progression so clearly. You start with congruence, aiming for internal harmony by using self-compassion to overcome incongruence. This allows you to move to self-actualization, where you fulfill your potential by choosing authenticity over external validation. And finally, that enables self-transcendence, where you connect to the whole by shifting your focus from your ego to service.
And here's the most important point to remember. Each stage builds on the last. Think of it like a staircase. Congruence is the solid foundation you stand on. That foundation then becomes the launchpad for self-actualization, which in turn becomes the launchpad for self-transcendence. You can't really skip the steps.
So this leaves us with one final thought. This isn't just theory, it's a practical map. Looking at this journey, where are you right now? And maybe even more importantly, what's the very next step you can take on your own path to wholeness?
What if I told you that you have the power to physically change the structure of your own brain? And not with some futuristic device, but just by deciding where to place your attention. I know, it sounds a little like science fiction, but it is a fundamental biological fact. Your focused attention isn't just some mental flashlight you point at things. It's the master key that literally unlocks your brain's ability to rewire itself. So let's just put the question right out there. What if you could become the architect of your own neural pathways? I mean, what if you could consciously direct how you learn, how you build skills, and even how you recover from injury? Well, the amazing thing is, you can. And today, we're going to break down exactly how that works, step by step. Okay, to really get this, we need to meet the two main characters in the story. On one side, we have focused attention. Think of this as the director of a movie. It's the active force, the one pointing the spotlight and yelling, this right here matters. And on the other side, we have neuroplasticity. That's the change itself, the brain's incredible built-in capacity to adapt and reorganize. So attention is the cause, and plasticity is the effect. One directs, the other changes. Now let's get a really clear definition of neuroplasticity, because this is so important. It's the brain's natural ability to change its own wiring in response to, well, everything. What we experience, what we learn, even how we recover from an injury. And the most critical part? This isn't just something that happens when we're kids. This ability lasts for our entire lives. All right, so if attention is our director, where exactly is the director's chair located in the brain? To answer that, we have to take a trip up to the brain's control tower. And here it is. Say hello to the conductor of the entire orchestra, the prefrontal cortex, or PFC for short. This part of your brain, sitting right behind your forehead, is the hub of high-level, top-down control. It's the part of you that separates a simple, mindless reaction from a deliberate, focused action. And wow, the PFC's job description is impressive. It's in charge of what scientists call executive attention. You know, the ability to plan, to set goals, to hold information in your head, and to make decisions. But maybe its most important job is exerting top-down control. It basically gets to tell all the other more specialized parts of the brain what to pay attention to, and just as importantly, what to ignore. But the PFC doesn't work in a vacuum. It can't just will the brain to change. To get the rest of the brain ready and receptive, it needs to create the perfect chemical environment. So let's look at the key chemicals that make all this change possible. Two neuromodulators are absolutely essential here. First up, dopamine. Now, we often hear about it with pleasure, but it's much more than that. Think of it as a relevance signal. When you're really focused, dopamine floods the system and basically tells your neurons, hey, pay attention. This is important. This is worth saving. Then you've got norepinephrine. This is your alertness signal. It provides the vigilance and arousal you need to actually sustain that focus over time. And this table really shows how it all comes together beautifully. You can see the PFC using dopamine and norepinephrine to direct our attention. But then that same dopamine hits other key areas, like the striatum, which is crucial for building habits, and the anterior cingulate cortex, which helps us notice when we're off track and need to apply more effort. It's this incredible, coordinated chemical system designed for change. But here's the catch, and it is a big one. It's all about balance. Neuroscientists have a fancy term for it, the inverted U curve, but we can just call it the Goldilocks principle. Too little dopamine and you can't focus. But surprisingly, too much dopamine and you also can't focus. That sweet spot for learning and plasticity happens only at that just right level of these chemicals. Okay, so we've set the stage. We have our control tower, the PFC, and we've mixed the right chemical cocktail. Now let's zoom all the way into the microscopic level and see how your actual neurons learn and change connections.
Right at the heart of all learning, you'll find two core processes. First, there's long-term potentiation, or LTP. This is when the connections, the synapses, between your neurons get stronger the more you use them. It's like turning a dirt path into a paved highway. On the flip side, you have long-term depression, or LTD. This is where those connections get weaker from lack of use. It really is the brain's use it or lose it principle in action. And this all boils down to one of the most famous and, frankly, most elegant phrases in all of neuroscience. It's called the Hebbian rule, and it goes like this: neurons that fire together wire together. When your focus makes specific neurons activate at the same time over and over, the physical connections between them get stronger. This is the cellular basis of every memory and every skill you have.
But you might be wondering, how does this apply to learning a complex skill, like playing a song on the guitar, that unfolds over minutes, not milliseconds? Well, that's where something called behavioral timescale plasticity comes in. Your focused attention, held steady by your PFC, basically holds that entire sequence of notes and movements in your mind. It stretches the learning window, allowing your brain to link all those separate events into one single coherent skill. It's pretty amazing.
So we've gone from the big picture control tower down to the tiny little synapses. Now let's connect it all back to a feeling we have all experienced. That journey from struggling with something new to suddenly being able to do it without even thinking. The path from effort to automatic.
This process follows a very clear path in the brain. First, any new skill starts as a goal-directed action. It's driven by that high-energy, hard-working PFC. It feels effortful. But with focused repetition, control starts to get handed off to a deeper brain structure, the striatum. And finally, with enough practice, the striatum takes over completely. The skill becomes an automatic habit, and that frees up your PFC to go and learn the next new thing.
Now, this is really important to understand. This incredible mechanism is totally neutral. It has no idea if a habit is good or bad. The exact same process that lets you become a chess master can also wire in unwanted habits. This is what we call maladaptive plasticity, and it's how things like chronic pain pathways or even the learned non-use of an injured limb can become deeply physically wired into your brain.
But, and this is a huge but, the fact that this system can create negative patterns also proves just how unbelievably powerful it is. And if we understand the rules of the game, we can consciously harness that power to drive incredible positive change. Let's look at some real-world proof. Take a look at this. It's called Constraint-Induced Movement Therapy, or CIMT, and it's a revolutionary treatment for stroke patients. To reverse that learned non-use we just talked about, they'll actually restrain the patient's good, healthy arm. This forces the patient to use their affected arm for hours every day. And that intense, forced attention drives massive rewiring in the brain's motor cortex, often restoring function that everyone thought was lost forever. And CIMT is not the only example. This table really highlights the pattern. On one hand, you have the sustained, forced attention of CIMT, which restores motor function. And on the other, you have things like neurofeedback, where you use targeted internal attention to enhance your own cognitive control. In every single case, the principle is exactly the same. Directed focus is the lever that creates real, measurable therapeutic change. So if you take only one thing away from all of this, let it be this. Your attention is so much more than just a mental state. It is the biological tool, the primary mechanism you have to grab the steering wheel and actively direct your brain's own renovation project. What you consistently choose to focus on is, quite literally, what your brain becomes. Which brings us right to a final and pretty powerful question. You are the architect of your own neural landscape. You are holding the blueprints right now. So knowing what you know, what are you going to build next?